Before we can go any further, there's just one thing we need to do before you can start taking awesome photos. On the surface, the iPhone camera can seem pretty simple and straightforward, and it is. But what a lot of people don't know is that there are some advanced settings that you can apply to help squeeze every last drop of value you can out of your iPhone, and take it a few steps closer to a professional camera. With that being said, let's go ahead and open our settings app and go down to the camera. Once we're here, the first thing we're going to go ahead and click on Formats up at the top. Now, if your camera is already set to the default settings on your iPhone, it's going to be on high efficiency. What we want to do, we want to go ahead and switch that to most compatible. There are benefits to both of these options, but we want it on most compatible. What high efficiency does is it makes your file a lot smarter when you take the photo, using up less storage in your phone. But the reason we want most compatible is for two reasons. One, it's going to make your photos higher quality, and if you ever end up sending these photos to a friend, they're going to be received a lot easier if they have a different phone other than an iPhone. Not only that, it's going to take your photos in the JPEG format, which is the most popular photo format in the world. Once we've selected most compatible, let's go ahead and go back and go down to the next one, which is preserve settings. Now in preserve settings, it's going to ask you if when you leave the camera app, do you want the settings you applied to your photo taking to stay when you open the app again? So this section is really a personal preference. It's really up to you if you want to keep the settings when you leave the app. Personally, I like to have them all on because it just makes it closer and feel more like a real camera. On a real camera, when you leave the camera or turn it off and you turn it back on, all the settings that you have on that camera will be left on the camera. So I like to try my best to make my iPhone resemble my real camera as much as possible. Next, right below that one is use volume for burst. We're going to go ahead and check that one on as well. What that does is if you hold the volume up button while you are taking photos, it will do a burst mode and take a ton of photos in the matter of seconds. We'll get into why that's useful later on in this class, but for now, we're going to check that on just so we have it to our disposal. Next, let's come on down to the composition section of the settings. The first thing we see at the top is grid. We're going to go ahead and check that on. What that does, it's going to add some lines when you take some photos, creating a grid on your live viewing to help you line up horizons or create better composition. It's really useful when you're actually out there in the field, so we're going to go ahead and check that on. Now, in this course, we're not going to really be using the back camera at all or the selfie camera, but just a little tip, mirror front camera, if you go ahead and check that on, it is going to make it so your selfies look exactly how they look when you're taking a picture. Sometimes you'll take a picture and when you see it, it'll be mirrored and your face looks all weird because you're not used to seeing it that way. If you go ahead and check that on, it's going to correct it so it doesn't do that and your selfies look normal. Once again, we're not going to be using that, but just a little tip. And then below that, we have view outside the frame. If you have this on, I highly recommend that you turn it off because what it does is when you're taking a zoomed in photo, it shows some of the picture outside of the frame. What that means is it's showing you image that's not going to be in your photo when you take it, and it can sometimes mess with your composition and the vision you have in your head because there's image in it that you think might show up in your photo, but then when you actually take it, it does not. So go ahead and just leave that off. In the next section, we have photo capture. The top one is prioritized faster shooting. We're going to leave that off for now. I only recommend that you turn that on if you're using the burst mode and want to capture some action. For the most part, we're going to have that off. Finally, we have Smart HDR, and we definitely want this on. What Smart HDR does is it blends the best part of separate exposures into a single photo. When you take a photo, you either have to adjust for the shadows or the highlights, and sometimes one of them can get blown out. What Smart HDR does is when you take a photo, it will take the best values and highlights and shadows from all the different photos and composite into one which it thinks looks the best. So like I said, we definitely want that on. And that's it for the camera settings. Your phone is now ready to go take some amazing photos now that we've done what's necessary to make the camera perform at the best of its ability.